Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar that will show you how to integrate ISO 9001 and ISO 14001. My name is Pereira da Cruz, and I'm an author at 𝗨𝗲𝗴𝗶𝘀. I do quite a lot of ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 consulting and training, but also auditing as lead auditor. So today I'm going to share with you my thoughts about ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 integration. My presentation will last about 40 minutes, followed by a 20-minute Q&A session. So if you have a question, you don't need to wait for the Q&A session. Feel free to ask it during my presentation by clicking the Q&A icon and submitting your question, or making comments if you are watching through LinkedIn or YouTube. Naturally, during the Q&A session, I'll also address your remaining inquiries. So if you click on the chat icon, you can download the PDF handout of this presentation and access links to articles that will be published during it, okay? So later, we will send you an email with a link to the recording of this webinar and the list of articles mentioned, all right? So let's go. Why is this topic important? So because integrating ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 simplifies your management system, reduces duplication and increases efficiency, allowing companies to align quality and environmental goals under one coherent structure. So what am I going to show in this webinar? Well, a step-by-step approach to integrating ISO 9001 and ISO 14001, covering what are the similarities, the differences, and practical implementation steps. Now, who is this webinar for? Well, for professionals managing ISO systems, especially those with ISO 9001 already in place, who want to implement or integrate ISO 14001 efficiently, including quality managers, environmental managers, auditors, and project leaders, okay? Now, just one note, so there is a growing number of companies that are implementing both ISO 9001 and ISO 14000 standards, and therefore a greater need to integrate these standards into a single integrated management system, or IMS. At the beginning of this integration process, many people wonder how to do it, since these two standards cover different topics. However, there are many things in common in both standards, even more than it seems at first sight, especially after the 2015 version of both standards and incorporation of Annex SL to adopt the high-level structure. Now, both standards have the same number of clauses for the same requirements, so they are very similar, although they obviously still have different approaches and many other differences, okay? Now, this is our agenda for today. So in today's webinar, we will discuss the following topics. First, we will start with the similarities, and then we'll discuss the differences between the ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 standards. Later, we'll talk about the issues of implementation and roles within the implementation process. Then we'll continue with the steps in the implementation, and we will finish with the challenges in the integration of both standards in a single management system, based on emails that we received before this webinar, okay? So let's go and check the similarities. So after the publication of the 2015 version of both 9001 and 14001, we find many more similarities than in the previous versions. So, of course, the PDCA cycle is still considered a very practical tool and a good way to implement and maintain the standard. So this part is maintained from previous versions of the standard. So we have the PDCA cycle that is common. We have the second similarity would be the high-level structure. So we understand by high-level structure this part of the standard where there are 10 clauses, and basically there are some same clauses for the same requirements in both standards. So this high-level structure makes much easier the integration. Okay, we have the context. So here we have the context of the organization, which is in clause 4. Along with this requirement in determining the interested parties, although of course the approach of this requirement is different for each of the standards, it can be fulfilled at the same time. Okay. Then we have the leadership, which in both clauses has to comply with involvement of top management in implementation of standards. Then there would be competence and awareness. Both standards require organizations to identify, to determine the training needs in order to acquire the necessary competence to develop the processes. This can be done conducting training for the existing employees or when hiring new personnel during the onboarding process. Now, we have the documented information. So this requirement is completely the same for both standards. And we are going to say that it replaces the previous one that dealt with the control of documents and records. Then we find the requirement of monitoring and measurement. So the use of key performance indicators for the processes is emphasized, but the requirements is practically the same. Although 9001 focus on one thing, 14001 focus in other things. Okay. Then we have the internal audit. The internal audit is the same in terms of its planning and implementation, but obviously the requirements of the standards are different. Then we have the management review, where the requirements are also the same, although there are some differences in terms of the inputs and outputs or results required. And there are also the non-conformities and corrective actions that are the same for both standards. Okay. Now, about this topic written with the similarities, I leave here two articles. One is called How to Integrate ISO 14001 and ISO 9001. And the other one is ISO 14001 integration with ISO 9001. What has changed? Okay. Now, let me see. We have here a question from Karen. Karen asked, I would be interested in learning which documents we currently use for ISO 9001 can also be used for ISO 14001, and if the quality and environmental manuals can be integrated. Well, Karen, many documents used for ISO 9001 can also be applied to ISO 14001. So as both standards share a common structure, the context, the leadership, the documented information, the audits, the management reviews, the corrective actions, competence and awareness, monitoring and measurement. So if you have a quality management system in place, you can use basically the same procedures or documents or whatever you call it, SOPs for internal audits, for management review, for corrective actions, for the control of the documented information, for competence awareness. Yeah. Regarding your question about the quality manual and integrated with environmental manuals, yes, the quality and environmental manuals can be integrated into a single integrated management manual that covers both systems, streamlining processes and avoiding duplication. Okay. Now, let's see differences. So while ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 share a common structure, thanks to Annex SL, their intent and application diverge significantly, okay? Especially when it comes to operational focus and stakeholder orientation. Here are the most relevant differences you should consider when integrating the two standards, okay? So we have, regarding 9001, we have the process focus, okay? So 9001 places strong emphasis on process definition and control, especially in areas such as design and development, production, service, provision, purchasing, and sales. So these are all detailed in Clause 8 and are central to managing product and service quality. So ISO 14001, while it also has an operational planning and control, so Clause 8.1, focus instead on controlling environmental impacts rather than product or service conformity, okay? So process focus. And then we have customer orientation and satisfaction. So ISO 9001 is uniquely customer driven. So it requires monitoring customer satisfaction as a performance indicator, so Clause 9.1.2, A system for requires a system for managing customer complaints, so as mentioned in clause 8.2.1, and a strong emphasis on meeting customer requirements and enhancing satisfaction, so clause 6.1.2, the customer focus, okay? And this is absent in ISO 14001, which is more focused on stakeholder engagement in relation to environmental expectations and compliance obligations, but not customer experience per se, okay? Now, let's see ISO 14001. So we have the environmental aspects in impact. So ISO 14001 introduces requirements for identifying environmental aspects, elements of the organization's activities that interact with the environment, and assessing their significant impacts. So this must be determined using set criteria and regularly reviewed. ISO 9001 does not include these concepts, okay? Then we have operational controls for environmental aspects and risks, clause 8.1. So in ISO 14001, organizations must establish operational controls specifically to manage significant environmental aspects and associated risks and opportunities. So this includes documented procedures, maintenance schedules, or behavioral controls where needed. ISO 9001's controls are typically focused on quality, consistency, and defect prevention in outputs. Now, what comes next is the emergency preparedness and response, clause 8.2. So only ISO 14001 requires organizations to plan for environmental emergencies, such as chemical spills or air emissions. So the organization must define response procedures, conduct training, and test the effectiveness of those responses. Something entirely absent in ISO 9001. Yeah, I wrote that, but yeah, sometimes I think, for example, in quality, or for example, for pharma, when we have the recall activities, recall process, okay, it would be something similar to this kind of emergency situation, but not the same as environmental. Now, and we have the compliance obligations. Okay, ISO 14001 includes extensive focus on legal and regulatory compliance related to environmental matters, including obligations from permits, local laws, or voluntary requirements. While ISO 9001 also requires compliance with applicable statutory and regulatory requirements, this treatment is more product-related and less expansive. So in short, while the structure is aligned, the core emphasis differs, okay? ISO 9001 is focused on product and service quality and customer satisfaction, whereas ISO 14001 is centered on environmental performance, compliance, and impact mitigation. Understanding these differences is critical to achieving meaningful integration without losing the intent of either standard, okay? Now, let's see some implementation issues, okay? So, what we are doing to talk about now, what we are going to talk about now are the most usual questions regarding the integration of the two standards, okay? The first and easiest question to answer is the question of whether the QMS and the EMS should be integrated into a single integrated management system. And of course, the answer is affirmative, since the best way to maintain both standards, the certificate and the management system, and really get benefits for the company, is to integrate both standards in a single management system, okay? Sometimes I see organizations, even big organizations, with certified quality and environment, they are different. The system, sometimes even the audit is different, and it's a waste of resources. I see it's a waste of resources. It's a competition between people for attention, for money, for time. Yeah. In this way, it is possible to reduce the amount of documentation. So when we integrate into a single EMS, okay, reduce the amount of documentation, also the amount of duplicated processes and duplicated activities, etc. Therefore, integrating the system in a single IMS will save time that can be invested in other tasks, and also avoid wasting resources, especially those related to personnel. Of course, joining the documents is not enough. when carrying out integration of the system, since the documents themselves do not show much if they are not put into practice afterwards. Okay, I remember many years ago seeing a big company, big company, where they had injection molding machines, and this is true. They had three documents, okay, three instructions. The green one was for the environment. I think the yellow one was for the health and safety, and I believe the white one was for quality. Okay, let's see. Well, but when people are doing their job, they are not using different hats. They only use one hat, and they are doing their job. And while doing their job, they need to integrate things. Okay, not what I'm thinking about quality. Okay, thinking about environment. No. So for this to better integrate, okay, we need, the best way to do this is by incorporating environmental operational controls into the processes. So for example, if there is a design and development process, it will be necessary to take into account the applicable environmental operational controls. Or for example, in the production process, it will also be necessary to include these environmental operational controls in the production procedures. This is undoubtedly one of the greatest evidence that the system is integrated and effective. So I will show you an example for this design and development document, and for the evaluation of suppliers. Okay. So on the other hand, in implementation and integration of management systems, the document PAS 99 was published with specifications for integrated management systems in a single system. This document is available on the internet, free, and can be of great help in the integration of management systems. And the last issue is to join, okay, quality policy and environmental policy. So in my opinion, the union of these two documents is really a sign that the systems have been integrated, since the policy represents the general and strategic direction that the company follows, and evidence that the organization is clear about what it wants to achieve as to the quality of its products and services, as to customer satisfaction, to the prevention of pollution, to the commitments to the environmental. When you have a single document that covers all these topics, you can consider that a good basis is established to define the objectives, okay, until you reach the review by the management. Malcolm is asking, doesn't the higher level RNXL structure almost negate the need for a PAS 99 EMS? Negate, no, but complement. So it complements, okay? Helps to complement that. Yeah, I think it's not a negation, but a complement. Now, let's see the roles in the implementation. So where we have it. Okay, so the next big issue in the implementation and subsequent maintenance project would be how to distribute the functions and the responsibilities within the integrated management system. Having a management representative who coordinates the activities, who collects system reports, can be beneficial to the integrated management system. Yes, I know ISO 9001, ISO 14001 no longer mention this management representative. Okay, but if it's not in the standard, but we can use it. We can use that role, okay, of coordination. That's important. I recommend that. The next important position is that of the person responsible for the environment, or someone who would be in charge of environmental issues and ISO 14001 within this IMS. Okay, in small companies, these functions as well as quality issues will fall on a single person. Although if the company has at least, 50, 60 employees, it would be better to have two people, since each of the standards requires a different set of knowledge. When implementing the standard and starting this project, it is very positive, if possible, to carry out the implementation of the standard as a project. So in those cases, it would be necessary to have a project team and a project leader. So in my opinion, it is better for the quality manager to be the project leader. But again, you will need people with different knowledge of quality and the environment. And the most important people that should be considered to be part of this project are those responsible for the processes. For example, the production manager, the supply manager, the sales manager, and these types of positions within the company. So what is considered the middle class management staff. Thus, the implementation process can be carried out more effectively and quickly if the responsibilities are shared and each department does its part of the work regarding both 9001 and ISO 14001. So with a project team, you can have multiple fronts of work going, so reducing the implementation work is being done in parallel, so the complete time for implementation is shorter, okay? So for example, when identifying the aspects, it is better for each department to do it on its own, since the staff of this department is the one who knows their own processes best. In addition, the more people involved in implementation project, the later maintenance of the standard will be facilitated because people buy in, okay, they participated, so there's buy-in. And of course, for every project within the organization to be successful in the company, in any company, it is necessary to have the support of top management. So for this reason, it's also good to define the sponsor of the project at the beginning, okay? That person that it's not the sponsor doesn't participate in the project normally, okay? But when there is a barrier, when there is obstacles, is someone with authority that to whom the project leader can ask for help, okay? To remove those obstacles, to use his or her authority. So I leave you the links for some articles. What is the job of the quality manager according to 9001? What is one article? The other one is, what is the job of the EMS, okay, the EMS manager? How to get management buy-in for an ISO 14001 project. And the last one here, 4 crucial techniques to convince your top management about ISO 9001 implementation. Okay, so Mohammed is asking a very interesting question. May the sponsor be someone out of the company? Okay, I would say it's not normal, but yes, it's possible. The critical requirement is that that person, that sponsor, has some kind of authority, okay? That can that person can remove any barriers, can provide more resources when needed, when justified, okay? So as I say, this is not common in my experience, but yeah, it's possible. Now, let us see here. Now, let's go to the implementation steps, okay? So Malcolm, I'll answer the other question during the Q&A, okay? Because I have there a slide just for you from one question that I received before this webinar, okay? Now, let's start with the steps of implementation. Hello. Okay, so determine context of the organization. So this is the first step, okay? The context of the organization provides the basis on which the management system will be built, okay? So regarding the 9001, it will be necessary to determine all internal and external issues that may affect the quality of products and services and customer satisfaction. While on the other hand, in ISO 14001, you will have to define all internal and external issues related to environmental protection, okay? So, basically, it's the same activity, but dealing with different topics, okay? As part of the internal context, we will have to define the structure of the organization, the map of the processes, and so on in terms of quality. And again, these type of aspects will be reflected in ISO 14001. Also, within the internal context is the organization's culture, the communication process in the company, the level of training and awareness. Now, regarding the external context of the organization, it will be necessary to study the situation in the market and the opinion of customers in the case of 9001, while regarding ISO 14001, it will be necessary to determine the environmental conditions in the region in which the organization is located or nearby. And in many cases, governmental institutions already have some analysis on the environmental situation that can be of great help, great value when determining the external context related to ISO 14001. So, in my opinion, it can be very helpful to have a procedure for determining the context of the organization in which it is defined, who will be involved, which elements will be examined, how often, how will it be carried out, okay? So, okay, now let's see. Define the QMS and EMS policy. So define the policy. The next step will be to define the policy. So if you decide to define it separately, okay, it's one thing. Or you can have a single policy if you opt for a single document, okay? So the purpose of these policies or the policy of the IMS is to define the strategic direction of the organization with respect to customer satisfaction, quality, and environmental protection, what needs to be achieved, what the company is committed to, and also to include some commitments that are necessary to have within those policies, such as the commitment to comply with legal requirements and others, like the commitment to continual improvement. So it is probably better to have only one policy for both standards, because in this way, you show that it's an efficient company that tries to avoid duplication of documentation, okay? The next step would be to provide resources. This step corresponds to the clause 7 of those standards, which contains the most common requirements of both standards, like control of records and documents, competence and awareness, and others. For this reason, I consider that before going into more detail to define other processes, define at the beginning of the procedure for document control of documents and records. Okay, that is, how will those documents be? So the format, how will they be identified? Will be responsible? Will approve the distribution? Okay, so now we have addressed risks and opportunities. That's the next step, related to both quality and environmental protection. These can be carried out as a same process shared by both standards. Again, it is necessary to address those risks and opportunities that arise from the context of the organization. So it can be part of the same process, okay? The context of the organization. So yeah, it can be part of that. It is not mandatory to define any methodology, okay, procedure or similar things, but it will also, be necessary to define those risks, okay, and opportunities with respect to the organization and take actions to address those risks and opportunities. So you need to determine what are the risks, evaluate them, and act. During the Q&A, I will show a slide that shows examples of risks, environmental risks, okay? So the most advisable thing is to develop some type of register of risks and opportunities and actions taken to address them. In reality, there is no strict requirement of how to document those risks and opportunities, but in the management review, it will be necessary to evaluate the effects of the actions taken to address the risks and opportunities. So it is better to record them in some way. I used to say it's something like, if you don't have records, you don't have memory. If the organization don't have memory, and if your organization don't have memory, the rate of learning is well below what could be, okay? Now, later, it will be necessary to determine the environmental aspects. This determination has to be carried out process by process, since in this way, the process approach will be demonstrated, but at the same time, it provides us with the necessary information to know exactly where to establish the operational controls that come later. Now, in terms of the life cycle, it will be necessary to first determine the phases of the life cycle of the product or service, and then determine the environmental aspects and impacts related to each of the phases of that cycle. And of course, to establish operational controls on the extension in what is possible to mitigate the consequences of environmental impacts. For example, in some cases, after producing the product and leaving the organization, you will not have much to do without that product will be handled or managed. So what can be done as operational control is to write user instructions for the consumer and or similar things, okay? Now, we determined the environmental aspects. Now we need to evaluate those environmental aspects. So the next step will be the evaluation of the environmental aspects, for which it is necessary to develop some kind of methodology and criteria for such evaluation. So it can be something simple, such as impact, consequence, and probability, or a different set of criteria can be defined. Okay. Now we have a question here. Dan asked, if certified against 9001 and ISO 14001, is it advisable to have separate policies for the two standards or to integrate them into a single policy? Well, Dan, both approaches are acceptable. 9001 and 14001 allow either one integrated policy or two separate ones, okay? One integrated policy is common and recommended when the systems are managed together. The pros are things like simplifies communication, aligns strategic intent, and avoids duplication. The cons are maybe less detailed if the audience is very different, so having a common. Two separate policies are used when different teams or external audiences are involved. So the pros are more tailored messaging is possible. The cons are risk of inconsistency and increased maintenance effort. Ultimately, it depends on how well integrated your management system is and who your intended audience is, okay? I will answer another question about policy integration during the Q&A with a specific slide, okay? Yeah, Mohammed is mainly making a comment. I think having one policy makes it easy to be communicated. Makes it easy to be communicated, but sometimes what makes it is, as I said, is not so deep, okay, not so focused. But yeah, I prefer a common policy. I must. This is really true. This is not something that I'm making right now. This morning I started reading a book that in the introduction of the book, the author is speaking about, companies nowadays have a strategy for the internet, a strategy for talent, a strategy for suppliers, a strategy for the value chain, a strategy for this, a strategy for that, and then at the end, he was I read. So he was saying at the end, things are so split that there's no common big picture vision. And I believe that we may fall into that same trap. Okay. Now let's see. Okay, let's continue here with the next steps. So here, so once the policy, the context of the organization, the risks and environmental aspects have been defined, is a good time to define the objectives, and this can be done at the same time for both standards. Okay. Okay. So okay, we define the objectives. Okay. We define what needs to be done by whom until when. Yeah, for both standards. So the next step is to establish operational controls. Okay, is to make this plan work by establishing operational controls for both standards. Regarding the 9001 standard, it is necessary to define operational controls for the processes. That is, to determine the inputs and outputs, the records, if the procedures are going to be documented or not, work instructions for different processes, such as sales, purchase, production, etc. On the other hand, the ISO 14001 standard requires defining operational controls for those significant environmental aspects, although this standard also has other requirements for processes, such as for purchases, where suppliers need to be evaluated if they are following any type of environmental protection system, or is in this design and development, where it is also necessary to consider environmental protection within this process or within the planning of a new product or service. Therefore, for each process that has a significant environmental aspect, these operational controls must be implemented and joined to the operational controls related to quality. So it's something like someone is operating a machine that delivers some widgets. Okay, to get the widgets with quality, they need to control temperature, pressure, the quality of the raw materials, something like that, and the cycle time. Okay, but also at the same time, okay, during the manufacturing, there will be some waste. Okay, where do I put the waste? What kind of segregation? What parameters should I control? Not because of the quality of the product, but to minimize emissions or to minimize things like emergencies. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So now, once the controls are established, it is good to establish KPIs or key performance indicators, which will tell you if the system is working and giving the results that were expected or not. We are going to say that the result of this step would be to carry out the monitoring and measurement from the satisfaction of the client, going through the measurement and monitoring of the environmental aspects and the effects of the operational controls. So we could be monitoring, for example, the rate of defects. We could be monitoring, for example, the quality of their emissions, or the amount of waste generated, or the percentage of waste that are going to be recycled. So yeah, so conduct monitoring and measurement, so KPIs. Then we have the internal audit, which is very similar in terms of planning and implementation, although there are different requirements. So I recommend to have only one process and a single program in which it is decided which processes will be audited, when and how they will be audited, whether for both standards and at the same time for each of them separately, or for each of them separately. Yeah, this depends entirely on the organization and its needs. Now, okay, we do the internal audit. Now we are ready for the management review. So we'll have the management review. In this step, my advice is to carry out at the same time for both standards. Once all the information for the management review has been collected, a meeting is organized with the top management where all the entries are discussed, and subsequently new objectives are defined, new actions to address recent opportunities, and so on and so on. And the final step is in implementation of maintenance of the system is continual improvement, or corrective actions and non-conformities. Okay, the requirements are basically the same for both standards, and this can be done with the same records, the same procedures. Okay, now let me see. We have a question here from the 𝗂𝗲𝗶𝗀𝗶. Okay, 𝗂𝗲𝗶𝗀𝗶 asks, please, a quick difference between objectives and KPI. Okay, about this conduct monitoring and measurement and define the objectives. Okay, so it's like, I don't have here, you see, I'm wearing here my glasses, that black box where we put inside the glasses. So imagine the company is like a black box, okay? And not the company, but your management system is like that black box. And you ask, what do I want from my management system? Okay, what do I want from my management system? What are the main objectives, the main demands that I want to get from my management system? Those are we call it the objectives. Okay, because they are aligned with the policy. Okay, it's mandatory. They must be aligned with the policy. Now, so when we think about KPIs, some of the KPIs may be related or may be similar to the objectives of the IMS. Okay, but not all. Okay, so for example, your organization may have, as an environmental aspect, may have air emissions, but your air emissions are under control, no problem, everything is under control. So you monitor because there are compliance obligations requiring that you monitor, but you don't need to have an improvement, a demanding improvement, demanding that you improve that performance, because you may say, oh, resources are scarce, I prefer to use my resources in trying to improve other things, okay, in line with my IMS objectives, okay. 𝗤𝗵𝗶, if my answer was not enough, please feel free to charge again, okay. So let me see. You will find all the necessary templates, okay, in our ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 integrated documentation toolkit. Let me show you how it looks like, okay. So let me see here. Okay, this is the integrated documentation toolkit. As you see here, we have here, this is our, we have here documents that are related with 9001 clause or 14001 clause. We have here, during the Q&A, there's a question about the mandatory documents. We have here, what are the mandatory documents about quality or about the environment. We have some procedures here that you see where we have integrated. Yeah, so, okay. These ones here are, okay, if you work in the, if your organization generates oil waste management, okay, this guideline is applicable. So if you work in the construction process, this procedure is applicable. What more? Okay, so yeah, okay. So now let me show you this example, procedure for purchasing and evaluation of suppliers. So this is a Word document, completely customized. So you see, we have here the process flow. So do we have this, the process flow, okay. Then what more? We have, okay, employing new suppliers. What is the process for employing new suppliers, for evaluating suppliers, and the criteria for selecting suppliers. And you see here that we include here integrated management system, and then the ranking and environmental operational control. And when we go, okay, in the same document is integrated. Okay, so we have all the topics to evaluate suppliers, or in the selection, or after, or reevaluation. And we have here one for the integrated management systems. Okay, and we have here operational controls, what can be relevant for, okay. And let's see another example. This one is for the design and development, okay. So again, this, we have the process flow, the requirements in 9001, and then we have here in the same document of environmental operational controls. Let's see here. So we have here the flow for the design and development. Let's see, let's go. Okay, environmental operational controls. So job titles, particular role is responsible for including environmental requirements in design and development inputs that contain but are not limited to selection of environmental friendly raw materials, efficient use, preservation, and consumption of natural resources, selection of recyclable packaging, for example. So yeah. Okay, let's go back here and let's go to, all right, let's go to the main challenges, okay, in the integration. So based on questions received before this webinar, the main challenges in the integration are integrated policy. So create one policy that satisfies clause 5.2 of both standards by adding distinct paragraph for customer-focused quality commitments, 9001, and the environmental protection objectives, ISO 14001. Keep it concise, auditable, and signed by top management. Then we have integrated audits. It's the second topic. So run a single audit program with a common plan, checklist, and report, but tag each finding to its relevant clause. So auditors need dual competence so that one visit covers quality, environmental aspects, and their shared processes. Now, when ISO, I had questions about this. When ISO 9001 is already implemented, okay, what gaps to address to fulfill ISO 14001 requirements? So gaps to close when ISO 9001 is already in place. So add ISO 14001 specific elements. So determination of environmental aspects and impacts, compliance obligations register, environmental objectives and KPIs, operational controls for significant aspects, and emergency preparedness testing. I also have a slide that goes during the Q&A that goes to this topic. And documents, okay, what documents can also be used with ISO 14001 when 9001 is already implemented, already in place? So most high-level items, so context analysis, process map, risks and opportunities log, document control, internal audit procedures, management review records, corrective actions, remain valid, only require updating to reference environmental requirements and data, okay? Now, let's go to the conclusion. So to conclude, as you can see, using the right implementation sequence and focusing on the most important documents will speed up your implementation project. And for that purpose, you can use Advisero's ISO 9001 and ISO 14001 integrated documentation toolkit. Here's the link with more details, okay? And I'll also send you now the meeting link to schedule a call with our toolkit expert, okay? He'll explain you how toolkit works and show you any document you would like to see, okay? So here's the toolkit expert meeting link. Okay, now, okay, so let's go for the Q&A, okay? Some of you requested some tips about how to implement the QMS. So we in Advisero developed a course for all those that want to implement a management system for their organization or as external consultants. So the video lectures are free. Perhaps they could help. So you can watch for free as you wish the ISO 9001 Lead Implementer course and the ISO 9001 2015 Foundations course. Okay, so let's see. Before we begin with the question and answer session, just to mention that you can also ask me anything about ISO 9001 or ISO 14001 directly. Just send me an email and I'll answer as quick as I can, okay? So if you have to leave before this Q&A session is over, please do fill in the short survey that will open right after you leave the webinar, okay? So let's see. Let me see here if we have any questions from LinkedIn or YouTube. No. Let me see here. No questions. Okay. Now let's see. Question here from Gerardo. Gerardo asked, I would like to learn how to integrate an internal audit program for both QMS and EMS. So integrate an audit program for both quality and environmental management system. So to integrate, okay, think about these. Both standards share a high-level structure and many common requirements, such as internal audit, management review. You know, I already mentioned that for several times here. Remember, you can focus on clauses or processes. So for example, plan one internal audit that evaluates both quality and environmental aspects of a production process. For example, checking compliance with product specifications and environmental legal requirements for emissions. And if the wastes are correctly segregated, for example. Okay, so you start with a high-level structure. Start with the high-level structure, and then think about this. Think about the process. Think about what people do, and then go go to the production, go to the design and development, and ask questions regarding the requirements of the standard 9001 and regarding the what are they doing to minimize impacts while designing new products and services. Okay. Now, Ara asked structure of audit report and how to follow up audit findings. Okay, so please check the recording of the free webinar on ISO audits, where you can see an example of an audit report content and the answer to how to follow up audit findings. Okay, so I leave here the link for how to perform an ISO internal audit. It's a webinar for both quality for 9001, for 14001, for 27001, and others. Okay. Now another question. 𝗍𝗲 asked mandatory requirements and documents. Okay, so regarding the requirements, all are mandatory. Okay, all are mandatory. All requirements are mandatory unless they are not applicable. So, for example, if your organization don't use materials or information or IP or so intellectual property from your customer or from an external source, perhaps clause 8.5.3 about property belonging to customers or external providers may not be applicable. Okay. Now, regarding mandatory documents, please check these articles. I leave here the ISO 9001 documentation requirements, the complete list, and the complete list for ISO 14001 list of mandatory documents required by ISO 14001 2015. Okay. Now, let's see. Question from Malcolm. Will the 2026 updates provide better alignment between the standards? Yes, for what I have already read, they continue to try to improve that alignment. Yeah. Jamili asked for addressing risks and opportunities to be done by processes. So we can, for these risks and opportunities, we can use this by the risks regarding the organization as a whole, when you consider context or the interaction between context and interested parties. You can consider the risks and opportunities regarding processes, and you can also consider the risks and opportunities regarding products, like, for example, batteries. So if a company manufactures batteries, what will customers do or consumers do with the batteries when the battery is dead? Okay, and that can be done by processes, that can be done by product, or that can be done by. So processes is one of the ways that we can use to bring some kind of framework for determining these risks and opportunities. Okay. Let's see here some more questions I have here. All right. So John asked, how different are environmental risks from environmental aspects and impacts? Okay, so environmental aspects are elements of your activities that can interact with the environment. Okay, so things like waste, air emissions, noise. Okay, these are the environmental aspects. Then we have the environmental impacts. Environmental impacts refer to the actual or potential changes to the environment resulting from various aspects, okay, including land use for proper disposal, air pollution, even if your company complies with emission limits, and disturbance to local communities. Okay, and so these are environmental impacts. Okay, when we think about risks, we go further. Okay, with environmental risk, we go further. We need to consider uncertainty. Okay, we need to consider what is not normal. or what is not the normal, so the normal situation. Okay, so in this case there may be some things like land pollution from improper disposal. So you may think, okay, is there any possibility, any probability that a supplier, or not the supplier, but the waste operator is not working according to the law? Okay, that's, some organizations may say, that may be possible, or others may say, no, we only work with certified waste operators. So okay, I'm saying this, and I'm remembering seeing in the social network images of someone throwing an old fridge to the river. So yeah, okay. Now what we have more? So air emissions, air pollution is the normal situation. But for example, you may have regulatory fines for exceeding permitted emission levels. Is there any possibility of malfunction, so of filters or sieves, for example? Okay. Or you may think about stricter future regulations, increasing operational costs. It's another kind of environmental risks. And then again, your company may have the net noise generated may be below limits. Okay, but is there any possibility of malfunction leading to higher noise levels? So fines for breaching noise limits set by authorities. That's another possibility. Okay, so this about John's question. Let's see another question. Question from Malcolm. Okay, Malcolm, I told you you have this question. So, is it simpler to have separate paragraphs in the policy to outline the differences between in the 5.2 policy clause requirements? So, yeah. Yes, I think having separate paragraphs in a single integrated policy is a simple and effective way to meet clause 5.2, okay, of both 9001 and 14,001. So it allows you to clearly address their distinct requirements, such as customer focus and quality objectives in case of quality versus environmental protection and aspects in the case of 14,001, while keeping the policy clear, auditable, and easy to communicate. Both standards require a policy that is appropriate to the context, so includes a commitment to compliance, continuous improvement, and risk-based thinking. The policies should be communicated, understood, and reviewed. However, ISO 14001 also requires a commitment to the protection of the environment, including pollution prevention, and a framework for environmental objectives. Okay, so something like, according to your organization environmental picture of aspects and impacts, or what are the relevant impacts or most significant aspects, what should be the drivers of environmental improvement. Okay. Now, and ISO 9001 emphasizes uniquely the customer satisfaction and also a framework for quality objectives. Okay, yeah. So using separate paragraphs allows you to clearly address the distinct focus of each standard, and clearly address the distinct focus, and makes audits and reviews easier by directly linking content to the requirements, and avoid ambiguity, especially when communicating the policy to different stakeholders. Okay, so yes, separating paragraphs within one policy is a simple, compliant, and auditable way to meet clause 5.2 or both standards. Okay, so we think we have here one more question. Okay, so when implementing ISO 14001 alongside an already established 9001, 27001 integrated management system, what typically are the gaps that need to be addressed to fulfill the ISO 14001 requirements. Okay, Wendy, when implementing ISO 14001 within an existing 9001, 27001 integrated management system, well, I believe that the key gaps typically that we need to address are this. So the determination of environmental aspects and impacts, the compliance obligations, okay, environmental legislation, permits, and other regulatory or voluntary commitments must be determined, updated, and regularly evaluated. So the level of legal monitoring is unique to 14001. I sometimes work with companies, yes, quality 9001 with a lot of 13485, with a lot of requirements regarding compliance obligations. But there are also several companies where compliance obligations regarding the product or the service are almost non-existent. Also, operational controls for environmental management. Okay, so you must define, implement, and maintain controls specifically to manage significant environmental aspects, including emergency response preparedness, which is not required under 9001 or 27001. Okay, the environmental objectives and planning. So objectives must focus on improving environmental performance, not just compliance or efficiency. So the planning must include how results will be evaluated. Monitoring environmental performance. So you'll need specific environmental indicators like for emissions, waste generation, energy use, recycling, that may not be captured under your quality management system or ISMS. And we have the emergency preparedness and response. Okay, so we can say that the most frequent gaps are this one. Okay, so yeah. Okay. So another question from DJ Millie. Do not understand why cost is a main analysis part of the EMS. Why cost is a main analysis part of the EMS, even if there is no risk on environment. So okay. It's about this slide. So stricter future regulations increasing costs. Yeah, there will be no risk on environment, but this is a environmental management system, or okay, the part of the integrated management system related with environment. And for top management, you must be sure that this is something that top management looks with concern, okay, because they don't want to get fines, they don't want to get to see the costs skyrocketing. So yeah, may not be relevant for environment per se, but it's relevant for the environmental management system. Okay, now okay. So I think we have already answered all of your questions. Okay, so let's wrap up the webinar. Okay, so just a few words before we finish. As I mentioned, this 1-hour webinar was intended to give you a general overview of integrating ISO 9001 and ISO 14001, not to go into a detailed discussion. For that, please take a look at our blogs. You can ask me anything about ISO 9001 directly by email. You can also download this presentation deck from our website or take a look at the video tutorials and documentation templates. We'll send you the email with all the necessary links, okay? Finally, if you join this webinar through Zoom, you'll see a short survey, so I will kindly ask you to spend a minute to fill it in. The recording of this presentation will be available in a few hours. You will receive a link to the recording. If you join the webinar through LinkedIn and YouTube, you will receive a link to the short survey now, and the link to the presentation will be posted on our event page in a few minutes. That will be all. Thank you for your participation, and I hope you enjoyed this webinar. Have a nice day.